Commander Zexhai settled into his chair, the weight of memory pressing down on his shoulders like a gravitational field. The young journalist across from him activated her neural recorder, her antennae twitching with anticipation. She had no idea what she was about to hear. It began 63 cycles ago, Zexhai started, his voice carrying the hollow tone of someone who had seen too much. I was a young officer aboard the Valorian dreadnought Stellar Dominion, part of the 7th Expansion Fleet. Our mission was routine, or so we believed. Scout the Outer Rim, catalog primitive species, establish mining rights, expand the Empire's borders. We had done it 1,000 times before, across 100 worlds. His claws drummed against the table's surface, creating a rhythmic clicking that echoed in the small chamber. The humans called their world Earth. A blue marble suspended in the void, orbiting a main sequence star they named Sol. When our long-range sensors first detected their electromagnetic emissions, we laughed. Radio waves. Crude television broadcasts. Nuclear fission reactors. They were barely past their industrial age. The journalist leaned forward. What was the initial assessment? Primitive mammals, Zexhai replied without hesitation. Bipedal tool users who had only recently discovered fire in galactic terms. Their most advanced spacecraft couldn't even escape their own star system reliably. Our xenobiologists classified them as a Class 7 civilization. Pre-warp, pre-unified government, pre-galactic awareness. They fought among themselves constantly over resources, territory, ideological differences. We saw a fractured species that would either destroy itself or remain trapped on their homeworld for millennia. He paused, his breathing apparatus cycling with mechanical precision. We were so very wrong about everything. Fleet Admiral Mortek decided on standard protocol, a demonstration of superior force followed by negotiations with the dominant power structures. We had perfected this approach across 3 galactic arms. Show them technology they could never hope to achieve, offer them a place as a client species under our protection, extract their resources in exchange for trinkets and basic technologies. It had worked on the Kellery, the Threnody, the entire Nexus Alliance. Why would these humans be any different? The memory crystallized in his mind with painful clarity. The Stellar Dominion dropping out of hyperspace beyond Earth's moon, its massive hull blotting out stars. The deployment of the first contact flotilla, 12 heavy cruisers and 40 escort frigates arranged in perfect formation. Enough firepower to glass a continent, positioned where Earth's primitive telescopes and radar systems could detect them. We sent the standard message, Zexhai continued, a broadcast in their major languages informing them that they were now under the protection of the Valorian Empire. They had 7 of their days to respond with coordinates for their capital city and leadership structure. We expected panic, then submission. It was the natural order of things. His mandibles clicked in what might have been a laugh, but there was no humor in the sound. The humans responded. All right. Not with the coordinates we requested, but with a single transmission that reached every ship in our fleet simultaneously. Their message was brief. Transmitted in what we later learned was their most widely spoken language. What did they say? 3 words in their English tongue. Come and take. Our translators initially struggled with the phrase, thinking it might be some form of ritual greeting, or perhaps a linguistic error. It wasn't until later that we understood it was a declaration of war. Zexhai's eyes lost focus as he recalled that moment of first contact, the confusion in the fleet's communication channels, the dismissive laughter of his fellow officers. The Admiral's decision to interpret the response as primitive bravado that would crumble at the first show of real force. We detected massive energy surges across their planet within hours of our arrival. Every major population center activated what appeared to be defensive systems. Not the crude missile platforms or projectile weapons we expected, but something else entirely. Our sensors couldn't properly classify what they were seeing. Admiral Mortak ordered a single frigate to perform a flyby of their largest landmass. Just a show of force, break their cloud cover, let them see our technology up close, watch their governments scramble to surrender. The frigate Swift Talon descended into their atmosphere over a region they called North America. The memory turned darker now. Zexhai's breathing became more labored as he recalled the events that followed. We lost contact with the Swift Talon 17 minutes after atmospheric entry. Complete communications blackout. Our sensors detected a brief energy spike over the coordinates they called Colorado, then nothing. A frigate capable of sterilizing a moon, gone without sending so much as a distress signal. How was that possible? The journalist asked, her recorder capturing every nuance of his words. We didn't know. Our technology couldn't explain it. The Admiral deployed 2 more frigates for search and rescue. They found debris scattered across 300 square kilometers of mountainous terrain. The Swift Talon had been dismantled. Not destroyed by conventional weapons, but taken apart at the molecular level. Every system, every circuit, every piece of technology that could be salvaged had been removed with surgical precision. Zexhai stood and walked to the chamber's single viewport, staring out at the stars beyond. That was when we realized the humans had been watching us. Not with primitive radio telescopes, but with technology we couldn't detect. They had been studying our ships, our formations, our capabilities probably since the moment we dropped out of hyperspace. The Admiral was furious. He ordered a full planetary bombardment, standard procedure for dealing with hostile primitives who had somehow acquired advanced technology. 12 heavy cruisers took up bombardment positions. They targeted the humans' largest military installations, their seats of government, their industrial centers. The silence stretched between them as Zexhai gathered himself for what came next. The bombardment never happened. As our cruisers powered their main batteries, something extraordinary occurred. Every single warship in our fleet simultaneously detected multiple target locks. Not from the planet's surface, but from empty space around us. Dozens of contacts that hadn't been there moments before simply materialized. Cloaked ships? No, not cloaked. Invisible to our senses by technology we still don't understand. The humans had somehow positioned an entire fleet around us without triggering a single proximity alarm. Our most advanced detection systems, sensors that could track a single atom moving at relativistic speeds, had been completely blind to their presence. Zexhai returned to his seat, his movements heavy with the weight of memory. Admiral Mortak tried to order an immediate retreat to hyperspace, but our jump drives wouldn't engage. The humans had somehow locked us in normal space without touching our ships. We were trapped in orbit around their world, surrounded by an enemy we couldn't see until they chose to reveal themselves. That was when they opened communications. Not through our standard channels, but directly into the neural implants of every Valorian on every ship. The voice spoke in perfect Valorian, without the slightest accent or mispronunciation. It knew our language better than we did. The journalist's antennae were practically vibrating with excitement. What did they say? Welcome to Earth. We are human beings. You came here believing you were dealing with primitives who would surrender at the first sight of your technology. You were mistaken. We have been aware of your species for the past 37 of your years. We have studied your methods, your technology, your tactics. We know how you subjugate worlds, how you break the spirit of entire civilizations. We are not the Kalari, we are not the Threnodai. We are not the Nexus Alliance. Zexhai's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Then the voice said something that still haunts my dreams. We are the species that turned warfare into an art form before we learned to write. We have been perfecting the science of killing for 10,000 years. Every weapon you possess we invented first and discarded as inefficient. Every tactic in your military doctrine we wrote and rewrote 100 times. Every strategic principle you follow we taught to our children as playground games. The communication ended with an offer. Leave immediately, never return, and spread word to every species in the galaxy that Earth is under human protection. Any attempt at invasion, colonization, or exploitation would be met with what they called proportional response. We had 1 hour to decide. Admiral Mortak chose war. He believed our technological superiority would prevail despite their apparent advantages. He ordered all ships to open fire on the nearest human vessels. It was the last order he ever gave. Zexhai fell silent, lost in memories too terrible to speak aloud. The journalist waited, understanding that some stories required time to tell. The humans responded to our attack with surgical precision, he finally continued. They didn't destroy our ships outright. They disabled them. Every weapon system, every engine, every life support backup, methodically shut down by weapons that passed through our shields as if they weren't there. In 17 minutes, the most powerful fleet in Valorian history was reduced to helpless hulks drifting in space. Then they boarded us. The simple statement carried more weight than any dramatic declaration. Zexhai's breathing apparatus cycled rapidly as he fought to maintain composure. They didn't breach our hulls or cut through our airlocks. They simply appeared in our corridors, our command centers, our secure areas. Humans in form-fitting armor that seemed to absorb light itself. They moved through our ships like ghosts, neutralizing resistance with weapons that left no trace of their passage. Our soldiers would simply collapse, alive but unconscious, their nervous systems temporarily shut down by technology we couldn't comprehend. I was on the bridge of the Stellar Dominion when they came for us. One moment, Admiral Mortak was screaming orders into his communicator. The next, a human was standing behind his command chair. She was small by our standards, barely reaching my shoulder, but there was something in her posture that radiated absolute confidence. She spoke in perfect Valorian, her voice carrying an accent I later learned was called British. "Admiral," she said, "your war is over. Your fleet has been captured intact, your crews unharmed. This is Colonel Sarah Chen of the Earth Defense Force. I am here to discuss the terms of your surrender." Zexhay's mandibles clicked rapidly. Surrender. She used the word so casually, as if it were already a foregone conclusion. Admiral Mortact tried to draw his sidearm, but his hand wouldn't obey his commands. None of us could move. The humans had done something to our nervous systems, a paralysis that left us aware but helpless. Colonel Chen explained that they had been monitoring our communications, studying our fleet movements, analyzing our tactical patterns. They knew everything about us, our homeworlds, our military capabilities, our political structures, our technological limitations. The humans had been preparing for this encounter for decades. She told us that Earth had been visited by other alien species before, scouts mostly. Advanced reconnaissance for various galactic powers who believed they had found another primitive world ripe for exploitation. Those previous visitors had underestimated humanity as well. Their fate had served as humanity's introduction to galactic politics and technology. The journalist's eyes widened. Other species had contacted Earth before your fleet arrived. 5 different civilizations over a span of 40 years. All had made the same assumptions we did. All had learned the same lesson we were about to learn. The humans didn't just defeat them. They captured their technology, reverse-engineered their science, improved upon their designs. Every species that had come to conquer Earth had instead provided the humans with the tools they needed to defend themselves against future threats, including us. Zexhai nodded slowly. Colonel Chen showed us holographic displays of our own fleet specifications, technical readouts more detailed than our own engineering manuals, tactical assessments about weapons and defenses that identified weaknesses our own designers had missed. The humans knew our ships better than we did. She explained that humanity had a concept they called adaptive warfare. They didn't just fight their enemies. They studied them, learned from them, incorporated the best aspects of their opponent's capabilities into their own arsenal. Every conflict made them stronger, more versatile, more dangerous. But that wasn't the most terrifying revelation. Zexhay continued, his voice growing even quieter. Colonel Chen told us that the fleet we faced wasn't Earth's military. It was a training exercise. The ships that had captured our entire task force were crewed by cadets, students learning the basics of space combat. The real Earth Defense Force had been watching from a distance, ready to intervene if their trainees encountered any difficulties. The chamber fell silent except for the hum of the recording device and the rhythmic cycling of Zexhai's breathing apparatus. The journalist stared at him, struggling to process the implications of what she was hearing. "Trainees," she whispered. "Students defeated the 7th Expansion Fleet?" "Without losing a single ship or taking a single casualty," Zexhai confirmed. Colonel Chen informed us that the human military academies used simulated alien invasions as final examinations. Our fleet had been nothing more than a practical test for graduating officers. She gave us a choice. We could return to Valorian space with a message for the Empire, or we could remain as prisoners of war until our government agreed to formal peace negotiations. Admiral Mortact chose pride over wisdom. He demanded to speak with Earth's leadership, insisted on proper diplomatic protocols, refused to acknowledge defeat to what he called primitive mammals. The colonel's response was educational. Zexhai stood again, pacing to the viewport as if the vast expanse of space could somehow contain the enormity of what he had witnessed. She transported the Admiral to the surface, to a place the humans called the Smithsonian Institution. She showed him artifacts of human warfare throughout their history, weapons that had been obsolete for thousands of years that were still more advanced than anything in our current arsenal. Battle tactics developed by ancient human generals that our military academies taught as revolutionary innovations. The Admiral saw cave paintings depicting organized warfare that predated Valorian civilization by tens of thousands of years. He saw weapons from what humans called their medieval period that incorporated metallurgical techniques we had only recently mastered. He saw documents describing military strategies from their classical era that our greatest tactical minds considered cutting-edge thinking. But the most disturbing revelation came when Colonel Chen showed him their museums of what they called recent conflicts.
Wars fought with chemical weapons, biological agents, nuclear devices, directed energy systems.
The humans had developed and used weapons of mass destruction against their own species for thousands of years, perfecting the art of warfare against opponents who shared their intelligence, adaptability, and creativity. Zexai's reflection in the viewport looked haunted, aged beyond his actual years. She explained that human military doctrine was based on a simple principle. Assume your enemy is as intelligent, resourceful, and determined as you are, then prepare for something worse. Every human military officer was trained to fight opponents who possessed all of humanity's advantages, plus whatever additional capabilities their species might possess. Admiral Mortak returned from the surface a changed individual. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something I had never seen in a Valorian officer before: genuine fear. He agreed to carry Earth's message to the Empire without further protest. The message was simple. Earth claimed no territory beyond their own star system, sought no conquest of alien worlds, desired no subjugation of other species. But any attempt to invade, colonize, or exploit Earth or humanity would be met with complete annihilation of the aggressor species, not just their military forces, but their entire civilization. Colonel Chen explained that humanity had spent their entire existence fighting wars of survival against opponents who sought their complete extinction. They had learned to respond to existential threats with existential responses. Any species that chose to make humanity an enemy would discover what 10,000 years of evolutionary pressure had created. The recording device continued its steady hum, as Zexai fell silent, lost in memories of that day when everything the Valorian Empire believed about warfare had been shattered by creatures they had dismissed as primitive mammals. That was our introduction to humanity, he finally said. But it was only the beginning of our education in what it truly meant to fight against beings who had turned warfare into an evolutionary advantage. The journalist noticed Zexai's breathing had become more irregular, his claws repeatedly tapping against the table's surface in a pattern that suggested deep psychological distress. She had interviewed countless war veterans, but none had displayed this level of barely contained trauma when discussing their experiences. The Empire's response to Admiral Mortak's report was predictable, Zexai continued, his compound eyes focusing on something far beyond the chamber walls. The High Command dismissed his account as exaggeration born of shame. A single fleet's defeat, while embarrassing, could be explained by technological surprise or tactical miscalculation. The humans had clearly acquired advanced technology from somewhere, perhaps abandoned ruins or a previous civilization. It was inconceivable that a pre-warp species could have developed such capabilities independently. His mandibles clicked in what might have been bitter amusement. Emperor Vaxthal declared the incident a temporary setback. He ordered the mobilization of the 3rd, 5th, and 9th expansion fleets, nearly 3,000 ships representing the largest military force the Empire had ever assembled. The plan was simple. Overwhelming force applied rapidly to crush any resistance before the humans could adapt their defensive strategies. What was your role in the second expedition? I was promoted to Fleet Tactical Coordinator aboard the flagship Imperial Wrath. My assignment was to analyze human capabilities based on the First Fleet's encounters and develop countermeasures for their apparent technological advantages. I spent months studying every piece of data we had collected, looking for weaknesses, patterns, anything that might give us an edge. Zexai's breathing apparatus cycled heavily as he recalled those preparations. The more I studied the humans, the more disturbed I became. Their tactical response to our initial contact demonstrated a level of strategic thinking that shouldn't have been possible for a species that had never fought a space-based conflict. They had somehow anticipated not just our arrival, but our specific tactical doctrines, our technological capabilities, even our psychological responses to resistance. Did you share these concerns with your superiors? I tried. I filed 17 different reports detailing anomalies in human behavior that suggested we were dealing with something far more dangerous than a primitive species with acquired technology. My analysis indicated that the humans possessed a fundamental understanding of warfare that transcended their apparent technological development, but my warnings were dismissed as paranoid speculation from an officer seeking to excuse the previous fleet's failure. The memory of those frustrating months showed clearly in Zexai's posture. His exoskeleton seemed to sag under the weight of decisions not made, warnings not heeded, opportunities for peace squandered by imperial arrogance. The second wave launched 67 days after Admiral Mortak's return. 3 massive fleets converging on the Sol system from different vectors, arriving simultaneously to prevent any coordinated human response. We carried weapons capable of cracking planets, shield generators that could withstand stellar bombardment, and enough firepower to sterilize every world in a dozen star systems. Emperor Vaxthal accompanied the expedition personally, commanding from his dreadnought Eternal Glory. He intended to personally accept the human surrender and witness the expansion of the Empire into their territory. The Imperial propaganda machine had already prepared broadcasts celebrating our inevitable victory over the upstart mammals who had dared to challenge Valorian supremacy. Zexhay paused, his claws drumming a complex rhythm against the table. We detected the human fleet before we completed our approach to Earth. Hundreds of ships arranged in what appeared to be defensive formations around their homeworld, but something was wrong. Our sensors were providing contradictory readings about their vessels' capabilities and configurations. Wrong how? The human ships appeared to be using our own technology, not crude copies or reverse-engineered approximations, but perfect duplicates of Valorian military hardware. Weapons, shields, engines, sensor arrays, everything identical to our own systems down to the molecular level. It was as if someone had stolen the blueprints for our entire fleet and constructed duplicate vessels, but that was impossible. Our military technology was protected by quantum encryption, biological locks, and psychic safeguards that no alien species had ever successfully circumvented. The idea that humans could have somehow acquired and reproduced our most classified designs was beyond consideration. Zexhay's voice took on a hollow quality as he continued. Emperor Vaxthal interpreted the similarity as confirmation that the humans had merely stolen technology from our previous expedition. He ordered an immediate attack, confident that our superior numbers and tactical experience would overwhelm any force using copied equipment operated by inexperienced crews. The battle began at long range with a simultaneous barrage from all three fleets. Thousands of plasma cannons, antimatter torpedoes, and disruptor beams targeting the human formation from multiple angles. It was supposed to be a demonstration of overwhelming firepower that would shatter their defenses and force immediate surrender. Instead, it became our introduction to the true nature of human warfare. The chamber's lighting seemed to dim as Zexhay's memories cast shadows across his features. The humans responded to our attack with perfect coordination. Not the hurried, desperate defense of a cornered enemy, but the precise, calculated response of a force that had planned for exactly this scenario. Their ships moved in formations we didn't recognize, using tactics that seemed to violate basic principles of space combat. They didn't try to match our firepower or engage us in direct confrontation. Instead, they dispersed into smaller groups. They'd used the debris field from our own weapons as cover, creating a chaotic battlefield where our numerical advantage became a liability. Our ships began targeting each other's signatures reflected off the floating wreckage, while human vessels seemed to appear and disappear at will. But the most disturbing aspect of their response was how familiar it felt. Every maneuver they executed, every tactical decision they made, seemed to anticipate our counter-responses before we made them. It was as if they were fighting against an opponent they had studied for years, an enemy whose every move they could predict. Zexhay stood and began pacing the small chamber, his movements agitated and restless. 3 hours into the battle, we realized the horrible truth. The humans weren't using stolen technology to operate ships they didn't understand. They were using perfectly duplicated Valorian technology because they understood it better than we did. What do you mean? Every system on every ship in our three fleets had been compromised before we ever left Valorian space. The humans had somehow infiltrated our military networks, accessed our classified databases, studied our tactical manuals, observed our training exercises. They knew our standard operating procedures, our emergency protocols, our command structures. They understood our technology because they had been watching us use it for months. The implications of this revelation clearly still disturbed Zexhay deeply. His breathing became rapid and shallow as he recalled the growing realization of how completely they had been outmaneuvered. Emperor Vaxthal refused to accept what was happening. He ordered increasingly desperate attacks, deploying weapons that violated several galactic treaties, planet killer devices, biological warfare agents, temporal disruption bombs, weapons of such destructive potential that their use was considered a war crime by every civilized species. The humans intercepted every weapon before it could reach its target. Not just intercepted, they captured them intact, analyzed them in real time, and developed countermeasures within minutes. Weapons that our best scientists had spent decades perfecting were neutralized by human technology faster than we could deploy them. Then the humans began their counterattack. Zexhay's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, forcing the journalist to lean forward to catch his words. They didn't use the weapons they had captured from us. They didn't need to. Instead, they began deploying systems we had never seen before, technologies that seemed to operate on principles our science couldn't explain. Ships that moved without visible propulsion, weapons that passed through our shields without interaction, defensive systems that absorbed our attacks and redirected the energy back at us. The humans were fighting with technology that appeared to be centuries ahead of anything in our arsenal. But the most terrifying realization came when our intelligence officers analyzed the energy signatures of their weapons. The technology wasn't alien at all. It was human in origin, developed using scientific principles that existed in our own databases, but which we had dismissed as theoretical impossibilities. The journalist's antennae twitched with confusion. You're saying they developed superior technology using your own scientific knowledge? Worse than that, they developed superior technology by taking our science and asking questions we had never thought to ask. Every system they deployed was based on extensions of known physical laws, practical applications of theories that our scientists had classified as interesting but impractical. The humans had looked at our technology and seen not achievements but starting points. Zexai returned to his seat, his movements heavy with the weight of defeated pride. The battle lasted 18 hours. By the end, 2 of our 3 fleets had been completely disabled, their crews captured alive and unharmed. The 3rd fleet, including the Emperor's flagship, had been forced to retreat to the edge of the system where human forces maintained a respectful distance. Emperor Vaxthal demanded a direct communication with human leadership. He expected to negotiate from a position of strength, using the threat of reinforcements from the Empire's other fleets as leverage for acceptable terms of surrender. The human response destroyed the last remnants of his imperial confidence. They patched him through to what they called the Earth Defense Council. Not military commanders or government officials, but a collection of what appeared to be elderly humans with no visible weapons or technology. The spokesperson was a woman who introduced herself as Dr. Mane. Elena Vasquez, Professor Emeritus of Military History at an institution called Stanford University. A professor? Not a general or admiral. An academic. A teacher. She explained to the Emperor of the most powerful military force in the galaxy that he had been fighting students, graduate-level exercises in applied combat theory. The actual human military had been observing the engagement as a training scenario for their advanced tactical programs. Zexai's mandibles clicked rapidly as he recalled that moment of ultimate humiliation. Dr. Vasquez informed Emperor Vaxthal that Earth's military academies used historical simulations of alien invasion attempts as standard coursework. The battle we had just fought was being recorded for use in next semester's classes on asymmetric warfare against technologically inferior opponents. She thanked the Emperor for providing such an excellent practical exercise for her students and offered to send him copies of their thesis papers analyzing our tactical errors. Several students had apparently written dissertations on the psychological factors that led advanced civilizations to consistently underestimate human capabilities. The chamber fell silent as both occupants absorbed the enormity of what Zexai was describing. The journalist's recording device continued its steady hum, capturing every nuance of a testimony that would reshape galactic understanding of humanity. The Emperor attempted to maintain some dignity in defeat. He demanded to know what terms the humans required for peace, what tribute they expected from the Empire, what territorial concessions they would demand as the price of their victory. Dr. Vasquez's response was perhaps the most terrifying thing any Valorian had ever heard. She explained that humanity sought no territory, required no tribute, demanded no concessions. Earth's only requirement was that the Valorian Empire agree to leave humanity alone and spread word of our encounter to other galactic civilizations. But she also delivered a warning that still haunts my dreams. She explained that humanity had been preparing for contact with hostile alien civilizations for most of their recorded history. Every work of science fiction, every military simulation, every theoretical exercise had been designed to ready them for the day when beings from other worlds came to conquer Earth. She told the Emperor that humanity possessed weapons we had never seen, technologies we couldn't imagine, strategies we couldn't comprehend. The forces that had defeated our fleets represented perhaps 1% of Earth's actual defensive capabilities. Everything we had witnessed was considered obsolete by human military standards. Equipment relegated to training purposes because it was no longer effective against their real enemies. Zexai's breathing apparatus cycled rapidly as he struggled to maintain composure. Dr. Vasquez explained that humanity had been fighting a war for thousands of years, not against aliens but against themselves. Every human military innovation had been tested against opponents who possessed equal intelligence, creativity, and determination. They had perfected warfare against enemies who could match their strategic thinking and technological adaptability. She described human military history as an evolutionary process where only the most effective strategies, technologies, and tactics survived. Thousands of years of constant conflict had produced a species that treated warfare as both art and science, philosophy and engineering. Every human child learned military theory as naturally as they learned mathematics or language. But the most chilling revelation was yet to come. Dr. Vasquez informed the Emperor that the human forces he had fought were not Earth's military at all. They were the Planetary Defense Force, a citizen militia composed of volunteers who trained on weekends and holidays. Earth's actual military had been deployed elsewhere. Deployed where? To the Valorian Empire's border worlds. While we were attacking Earth with our three largest fleets, human forces had been systematically capturing every Valorian military installation within 50 light-years of their territory, not destroying them but capturing them intact along with all personnel, equipment, and intelligence databases. The implication of this tactical maneuver clearly still overwhelmed Zexai. His voice became almost inaudible as he continued. In the time it had taken us to travel to Earth and fight a single battle, the humans had conquered an entire sector of Valorian space without firing a shot. Our border fleets had simply disappeared, their crews taken prisoner, their ships added to the human arsenal. Dr. Vasquez explained that humanity considered defensive warfare a waste of resources. Their military doctrine was based on the principle that the best defense was rapid elimination of an enemy's ability to wage war. While we were focused on capturing Earth, they were systematically dismantling the infrastructure that made our attack possible. She offered to return our captured personnel and territory in exchange for a formal non-aggression pact and the immediate withdrawal of all Valorian forces from human space. But she also delivered an ultimatum that left no room for negotiation. Which was, any future Valorian aggression against humanity or human interests would result in what she called comprehensive response. The humans would not limit themselves to defensive actions or proportional retaliation. They would eliminate the Valorian Empire as a political entity and assume responsibility for governing our worlds until they could be safely returned to civilian control. Zexhay's compound eyes reflected the chamber's lighting like broken mirrors. She explained this policy as a natural extension of human military thinking. They had learned through thousands of years of warfare that defeated enemies who retained the ability to fight would inevitably seek revenge. The only way to ensure lasting peace was to remove an opponent's capacity for future aggression. Emperor Vaxthal agreed to every human demand without negotiation. He signed the Non-Aggression Pact, ordered the immediate withdrawal of all Valorian forces from human space, and pledged that the Empire would spread word of human capabilities to every species in the galaxy. But the humans weren't finished with their education of Valorian leadership. The recording device captured the long pause as Zexay gathered himself for what was clearly the most difficult part of his testimony. His claws drummed against the table in increasingly rapid patterns, betraying an anxiety that had never fully healed. Dr. Vasquez invited a delegation of our officers to visit Earth's surface. She wanted us to understand exactly what kind of species we had attempted to conquer. The Emperor selected me as part of the group, hoping that a tactical analysis of human capabilities might help prevent future disasters. What we saw during that visit changed everything we thought we knew about intelligence, technology, and the nature of warfare itself. The delegation shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere under escort by human vessels that seemed to bend light around their hulls. Zexhai pressed against the viewport, watching a blue world unlike anything in Valorian space grow larger beneath them. The planet appeared almost impossibly vibrant, its surface a patchwork of green continents and azure oceans that caught and reflected their star's light in ways that made the entire world seem to glow. The humans brought us to a facility they called the Pentagon, Zexhai continued, his voice taking on a different quality as he recalled that descent. From orbit, it appeared to be a simple geometric structure, unremarkable among the sprawling urban centers that covered much of their largest continent, but our sensors detected energy readings that suggested something far more complex, hidden beneath its unassuming exterior. The journalist leaned forward, captivated by the change in Zexhay's demeanor. Where before he had seemed haunted by memories of defeat, now there was something approaching wonder in his voice, as if the horrors of war had given way to a different kind of revelation. Dr. Vasquez met us at what they called the landing pad. She was smaller than I had expected from her voice transmissions, an elderly human female with silver hair and kind eyes that seemed to sparkle with intelligence. But there was something in her bearing, a confidence that radiated from her slight frame, that made it impossible to dismiss her as merely an academic. She welcomed us to Earth as if we were visiting dignitaries rather than representatives of a species that had just attempted to conquer her world. There was no hostility in her manner, no triumph at having defeated forces that outnumbered her people by millions to one. Instead, she seemed genuinely pleased to have the opportunity to share her world's culture with beings from another star. Zexhai's mandibles clicked in what might have been confusion even decades later. Our delegation consisted of military officers who had spent their careers studying warfare, tactics, and strategic planning. We expected to be shown weapons factories, military installations, the industrial infrastructure that had made humanity's victory possible. Instead, Dr. Vasquez led us to a museum. A museum? The Smithsonian Institution. The same place Admiral Mortak had been taken during the first contact. Dr. Vasquez explained that to understand humanity's military capabilities, we first needed to understand their history, their culture, the evolutionary pressures that had shaped their species into what they had become. The memory seemed to transport Zexay back to that moment of first stepping onto an alien world. His breathing became more regular, his posture less tense, as if the wonder of discovery had temporarily overwhelmed the trauma of defeat. The museum contained artifacts spanning thousands of years of human development, but it wasn't arranged chronologically as we would have expected. Instead, exhibits were organized thematically around what Dr. Vasquez called adaptive responses to existential challenges. Every display demonstrated how humans had faced threats to their survival and transformed those challenges into evolutionary advantages. She showed us stone tools created by their earliest ancestors, simple implements that revealed sophisticated understanding of material properties, engineering principles, and manufacturing processes. These primitive weapons were more effective than anything our archaeologists had discovered from species at equivalent developmental stages. But what disturbed our delegation was the realization that these tools weren't crude approximations of advanced technology. They were optimized designs that achieved maximum effectiveness within the constraints of available materials and manufacturing capabilities. Even at the dawn of their technological development, humans were already thinking like engineers. Zexay stood and moved to the viewport again, his reflection ghost-like against the stars beyond. Dr. Vasquez explained that human evolution had been shaped by what she called environmental pressure selection. Unlike most species that developed intelligence to exploit abundant resources, humans had evolved intelligence as a survival mechanism in an environment that was actively hostile to their existence. Their homeworld had tried to kill them from the moment their species achieved consciousness. Climate changes, natural disasters, predatory animals, resource scarcity, disease. Earth had presented an endless series of challenges that should have driven any intelligent species to extinction. Instead, humans had used each threat as an opportunity to become more adaptable, more resourceful, more capable of survival under impossible conditions. She showed us exhibits documenting their species' response to an ice age that covered most of their planet in glaciers. Rather than retreat to warmer regions or hibernate until conditions improved, humans developed technologies to survive in frozen wastelands that would have been instantly lethal to any other known species. They didn't just endure the ice age, they thrived in it, spreading across continents that were uninhabitable to any other life form. The journalist's antennae twitched with fascination. How does this relate to their military capabilities? Every survival adaptation became a military advantage, Zexay replied without hesitation. The tools they developed to hunt dangerous predators became weapons of war. The strategies they used to survive resource scarcity became principles of battlefield logistics. The social cooperation they needed to endure environmental disasters became the foundation of military unit cohesion. Dr. Vasquez showed us cave paintings depicting organized human warfare from before their species had developed written language. These weren't crude tribal conflicts over territory or resources. They were sophisticated military campaigns involving coordinated strategy, specialized roles, technological innovation, and long-term planning. Humans had been perfecting the art of war for thousands of years before most galactic species had achieved spaceflight. Zexay's breathing apparatus cycled heavily as he recalled the growing realization of what his delegation was witnessing. The most disturbing revelation came when Dr. Vasquez explained the concept they called total war. Throughout their history, humans had faced enemies that sought not just their defeat, but their complete extinction. In response, they had developed military doctrines based on the assumption that every conflict was a fight for survival. Unlike galactic species that fought wars for territory, resources, or political advantage, humans fought wars to eliminate threats to their existence. They didn't seek victory. They sought the complete elimination of their enemy's ability to pose future danger. This wasn't cruelty or barbarity. It was evolutionary necessity born from thousands of years of facing opponents who would accept nothing less than humanity's total destruction. But the most sophisticated example of this thinking was displayed in an exhibit dedicated to what they called World War II. Dr. Vasquez explained that this conflict had involved virtually every nation on their planet in a struggle that lasted multiple years and resulted in tens of millions of casualties. The chamber fell silent as Zexay struggled with memories that clearly disturbed him on a fundamental level. The scale of this conflict was beyond anything in recorded galactic history. Imagine every species in three-star systems simultaneously engaged in warfare using weapons of mass destruction, fighting for the right to exist as free beings. Now imagine that this conflict was considered a relatively minor example of human military capability. Dr. Vasquez showed us weapons from this war that demonstrated technological principles our scientists were still developing. Aircraft that could fly faster than sound, submarines that could remain underwater for months, radar systems that could track objects beyond the horizon, electronic computers that could calculate ballistic trajectories in real time. But the most remarkable aspect wasn't their technology. It was their logistics. Humans had coordinated military operations across multiple continents simultaneously, supplying armies of millions of soldiers with food, ammunition, medical care, and equipment. They had industrialized warfare, turning entire civilizations into military production systems capable of manufacturing weapons faster than they could be destroyed. Zexai returned to his seat, his movements heavy with the weight of understanding that had fundamentally changed his worldview. Our delegation spent 3 days in that museum. Each exhibit revealed new aspects of human military thinking that challenged everything we believed about warfare, technology, and the nature of intelligence itself. Dr. Vasquez explained that human children learn military strategy as part of their basic education. Games that appeared to be simple entertainment were actually training exercises in tactical thinking, resource management, and strategic planning. Every human civilian possessed knowledge of warfare that exceeded the training of most galactic military officers. She showed us their entertainment media, stories, films, and interactive simulations that explored every possible scenario of conflict and survival. Humans spent their leisure time imagining how they would respond to alien invasions, natural disasters, technological failures, social collapse, and countless other threats. They had been mentally preparing for our arrival for centuries. But the most chilling discovery was their concept of asymmetric warfare. Dr. Vasquez explained that humans had perfected techniques for defeating superior forces using inferior technology. Throughout their history, smaller human populations had repeatedly defeated larger, better-equipped armies through superior strategy, tactics, and understanding of their opponent's psychological weaknesses. The journalist's recorder captured the long pause as Zexai gathered himself for what was clearly a particularly difficult memory. She showed us historical examples of human forces defeating enemies that outnumbered them by factors of 10 to 1 or more. Not through luck or accident, but through systematic application of principles they had developed over thousands of years of warfare against impossible odds. Dr. Vasquez explained that every human military officer studied these historical examples as part of their training. The defeat of the Persian Empire by Greek city-states, the conquest of the Aztec Empire by a few hundred Spanish soldiers, the victory of Vietnamese forces against technologically superior French and American armies. Each case demonstrated human capability to overcome overwhelming disadvantages through intelligence, adaptability, and understanding of warfare as a psychological rather than purely technological phenomenon. Then she brought us to the part of the museum that still haunts my dreams. Zexai's voice became almost inaudible, forcing the journalist to lean forward to catch his words. An exhibit dedicated to what humans called the Holocaust. Vasquez explained that this was an example of what happened when human military efficiency was applied to the systematic elimination of civilian populations. In the span of a few years, a single human nation had industrialized genocide, developing technologies and procedures for killing millions of people with mechanical efficiency. She showed us photographs, documents, physical evidence of humanity's capacity for organized destruction when they chose to apply their military thinking to the elimination of perceived enemies. The scale was beyond comprehension. Entire populations erased with the methodical precision that characterized all human technological endeavors. But Dr. Vasquez's point wasn't to demonstrate human cruelty. She was showing us what our species would face if humanity ever decided that we represented an existential threat to their survival. The same efficiency that had made their victory over our fleets possible could be applied to the elimination of entire civilizations if humans concluded that peaceful coexistence was impossible. The recording device continued its steady hum as both occupants of the chamber absorbed the implications of this revelation. The journalist's antennae drooped as she began to understand the true nature of the species her people had attempted to conquer. The museum visit concluded with an exhibit dedicated to human space exploration, Zexai continued. Dr. Vasquez showed us artifacts from their early attempts to leave their homeworld, primitive rockets that had somehow carried humans to their planet's natural satellite using technology that should have been insufficient for such a journey. But what impressed our delegation wasn't their technological achievements. It was the mindset that had driven humans to risk their lives exploring hostile environments with inadequate equipment. She explained that human culture celebrated individuals who voluntarily faced death to expand their species' knowledge and capabilities. Space exploration, she told us, was considered a logical extension of the same survival instincts that had driven human military development. Their homeworld would eventually become uninhabitable due to natural processes. So humans were preparing to spread across the galaxy to ensure their species' survival. Dr. Vasquez explained that humanity's long-term strategy involved the colonization of hundreds of worlds, the establishment of self-sufficient colonies that could survive even if Earth itself were destroyed. They were planning for contingencies that might not occur for thousands of years, thinking in timescales that spanned geological epochs. Zexai's breathing became more labored as he recalled the final revelation of that museum visit. She showed us plans for generation ships, vessels designed to carry human populations across interstellar distances over centuries of travel. These weren't theoretical concepts, but active engineering projects with dedicated funding and construction timelines. The humans were preparing to spread across the galaxy whether other species welcomed them or not. They had studied galactic civilizations, analyzed our technologies and territorial boundaries, and developed strategies for establishing human colonies and systems we had never explored. They were planning for a future where humanity would become a galactic power, regardless of alien cooperation or resistance. But the most disturbing aspect of these plans was their contingency protocols. Dr. Vasquez explained that human colony ships would be equipped with complete industrial capabilities, allowing them to establish fully functional civilizations on any world capable of supporting life. If peaceful coexistence with galactic species proved impossible, humans were prepared to expand into unexplored regions and develop technologies that would eventually allow them to return as conquerors rather than refugees. She told our delegation that humanity preferred cooperation to conflict, but they were prepared for either possibility. Their species had learned never to depend on the goodwill of potential enemies for their survival. They would offer friendship to alien civilizations, but they would not allow alien species to control humanity's destiny. The chamber fell silent as Zexai concluded his account of that transformative museum visit. The journalist stared at her recording device, struggling to process the implications of what she had heard. Humanity wasn't just another galactic species. They were something entirely unprecedented in the known universe. That was when I began to understand, Zexai said quietly, that we hadn't just lost a military engagement. We had encountered a species that represented an entirely different approach to existence, survival, and the relationship between intelligence and power. The humans hadn't defeated us through superior technology. They had defeated us through superior thinking. After the museum, Dr. Tiger Django Vasquez led the Valorian delegation to what she described as the real heart of human military capability. Not weapons factories or starship construction facilities, but something far more fundamental to understanding how humanity had achieved such devastating effectiveness in warfare. She brought us to the United States Military Academy at West Point. Zexai continued, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and residual fear. From the outside, it appeared to be a collection of stone buildings arranged around carefully maintained grounds. Our sensors detected no advanced technology, no weapons systems, no evidence of the industrial capacity that had produced humanity's devastating military capabilities. What we found there changed everything I thought I understood about the nature of warfare and the development of military thinking. The journalist noticed that Zexai's demeanor had shifted again. Where the museum visit had seemed to inspire a kind of philosophical contemplation, his memories of the military academy carried undertones of something approaching horror. Dr. Vasquez explained that we were visiting a school, an educational institution, where young humans learned the theoretical and practical aspects of military leadership. But as she led us through their classrooms and training facilities, it became clear that we weren't observing ordinary academic instruction. We watched 18-year-old humans, barely more than children by Valorian standards, engaged in simulation exercises that recreated historical battles with perfect accuracy. They commanded virtual armies through conflicts that had occurred centuries before their births, making tactical decisions that determined the fates of millions of simulated soldiers. Zexai's breathing apparatus cycled rapidly as he recalled the disturbing precision of those exercises. These weren't games or theoretical discussions. The human students were required to experience the psychological pressure, moral complexity, and strategic thinking that characterized actual warfare. Every decision carried consequences that reflected the real costs of military command. But what disturbed our delegation most was the casual expertise these young humans displayed. They discussed the logistics of supplying armies across continental distances as if they were solving routine mathematical problems. They analyzed the psychological factors that influence troop morale with the same clinical detachment our scientists applied to studying stellar mechanics. Vasquez explained that every human officer was required to study the military history of their own species in exhaustive detail. They learned not just the outcomes of historical conflicts, but the decision-making processes that had led to victory or defeat. Every human military commander possessed knowledge of thousands of battles, strategies, and tactical innovations developed across centuries of warfare. The implications of this systematic approach to military education clearly still overwhelmed Zexai. His claws drummed against the table in patterns that suggested deep anxiety as he continued.
We observed a classroom where students were analyzing our own fleet movements from the recent battle.
They had access to detailed recordings of every tactical decision we had made, complete with commentary from human observers who had identified the strategic errors that led to our defeat. These students, teenagers who had never left their homeworld, were discussing our tactical limitations with the expertise of seasoned military analysts. They understood our capabilities better than our own strategic planning committees. They had identified weaknesses in Valorian military doctrine that our best minds had never recognized. Dr. Vasquez invited us to participate in one of their exercises, a simulation of interstellar warfare where human students would command alien fleets against opponents using human tactics. She explained that this was standard coursework. Future human officers learned to think like their potential enemies as part of their basic training. The memory of that simulation clearly disturbed Zexahai on a profound level. His voice became strained as he forced himself to continue. Our delegation was assigned to command the alien forces in a hypothetical conflict. We were given access to technology superior to anything humanity possessed, numerical advantages of hundreds to one, and complete intelligence about human defensive capabilities. We were systematically destroyed by 18-year-old students who had been studying human military doctrine for less than 4 years. The chamber fell silent as the implications of this revelation settled between them. The journalist's antennae drooped as she began to understand the true scope of humanity's military superiority. The human students didn't just defeat us, Zexai continued quietly. They anticipated our strategies before we implemented them, countered our tactical innovations before we fully developed them, and exploited weaknesses in our approach that we didn't know existed. It was as if they were fighting an enemy they had studied for years rather than encountering alien military thinking for the first time. Dr. Vasquez explained that the simulation was designed to teach human officers how to think like non-human intelligences. Every known species' tactical preferences, strategic limitations, and psychological characteristics were incorporated into the program. Human military commanders were trained to fight opponents they had never encountered using strategies they had never seen. But the most disturbing aspect of the exercise was the casual efficiency with which these students dismantled our forces. They showed no emotion, no satisfaction at victory, no contempt for defeated opponents. The destruction of our simulated fleets was simply a problem to be solved using established principles of military science. Zexhei stood and began pacing the chamber again, his movements agitated by memories that still triggered psychological distress. After the simulation, Dr. Vasquez showed us the Academy's library, thousands of volumes dedicated to the study of warfare, strategy, and military leadership. But these weren't just human texts. They contained analyses of every known galactic species, military capabilities, tactical preferences, and strategic thinking. The humans had been studying us for decades, not just the Valorian Empire, but every major galactic power. They possessed detailed assessments of our technologies, organizational structures, command hierarchies, and psychological characteristics. They knew our military capabilities better than we knew them ourselves. She explained that human military doctrine was based on the assumption that any species capable of interstellar travel would eventually become either an ally or an enemy. Since humanity couldn't control which relationship would develop, they prepared for both possibilities simultaneously. The journalist leaned forward, struggling to comprehend the scope of human strategic planning. They were preparing for war against civilizations they had never met? Worse than that, Zexhei replied. They were preparing for war against civilizations that didn't yet exist. Dr. Vasquez showed us theoretical studies of military capabilities that could emerge from various evolutionary pathways. Humans had developed tactical responses to enemies they had imagined based on biological and technological possibilities. They had studied the logical development of warfare for every conceivable type of intelligence that might arise in the universe. Silicon-based consciousness, hive minds, energy beings, artificial intelligences. Human military planners had developed strategies for fighting opponents that existed only in theoretical speculation. But the truly terrifying revelation came when Dr. Vasquez explained humanity's approach to what they called asymmetric technological warfare. The concept of fighting enemies whose technology was centuries or millennia more advanced than their own. Zexai's breathing became labored as he recalled that particular discussion. Humans assumed that any species capable of interstellar travel would possess technology superior to their own, so they developed military doctrines that didn't depend on technological parity. They studied ways to defeat superior forces using inferior equipment, strategies that turned an opponent's technological advantages into vulnerabilities. Dr. Vasquez showed us historical examples from their own planet, instances where technologically primitive human forces had defeated more advanced enemies by understanding their psychology, exploiting their assumptions, and using their superior technology against them. She explained that humans had spent thousands of years perfecting techniques for fighting opponents who possessed every advantage except one: the ability to think like humans. Superior technology couldn't compensate for inferior strategic thinking, and humans had evolved superior strategic thinking as a survival mechanism. The Academy's curriculum included detailed studies of alien psychology based on observed behavior from galactic species. Human officers learned to identify the cognitive limitations, psychological biases, and strategic blind spots that characterized non-human intelligence. They were trained to exploit these weaknesses regardless of their opponent's technological superiority. The recording device captured the long pause as Zexai gathered himself for what was clearly the most disturbing revelation of his visit to the military academy. Dr. Vasquez brought us to a classroom where advanced students were studying something they called extinction-level warfare. Military strategies designed not to defeat enemies but to eliminate them as threats to human survival permanently. These students were learning to plan the systematic destruction of entire civilizations. Not through indiscriminate violence or primitive brutality, but through precise application of military pressure designed to collapse an opponent's ability to maintain technological civilization. They studied methods for destroying industrial infrastructure, eliminating technological knowledge, disrupting social cohesion, and reducing advanced species to pre-technological conditions. The goal wasn't genocide, it was permanent neutralization of an enemy's capacity to pose future threats to humanity. Zexai's voice became almost inaudible as he continued. Dr. Vasquez explained that this level of warfare was considered a last resort, to be applied only against species that proved impossible to coexist with peacefully. But the fact that humans had developed such strategies as standard military doctrine demonstrated their commitment to survival regardless of the moral costs. She showed us theoretical studies of how such campaigns would be conducted against every known galactic species, detailed analyses of our economic systems, technological dependencies, social structures, and psychological characteristics, plans for reducing the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy to primitive agricultural societies within a few generations. The human students discussed these strategies with the same clinical detachment they applied to conventional tactical problems. The complete destruction of galactic civilization was simply another problem to be solved using established principles of military science. The chamber fell silent as both occupants absorbed the enormity of what Zexai was describing. The journalist's recorder continued its steady hum, capturing a testimony that revealed the true scope of humanity's strategic thinking. That was when I understood the real message Dr. Cox Vasquez was delivering, Zexai said quietly. The humans weren't threatening us, they were educating us. They wanted galactic species to understand exactly what kind of enemy we would face if peaceful coexistence proved impossible. She explained that humanity's preference for peace wasn't based on moral considerations or fear of warfare. It was a strategic choice based on efficiency. Cooperation was simpler and more resource-effective than conquest. But if other species made cooperation impossible, humans were prepared to pursue their survival through alternative means. The military academy represented humanity's insurance policy against the possibility that the galaxy might prove hostile to their existence. They had spent centuries developing the intellectual tools necessary to survive in a universe filled with potential enemies. Dr. Vasquez told our delegation that every human child learnt military thinking as part of their basic education. Strategic planning, tactical analysis, resource management, psychological warfare. These concepts were integrated into their civilian curriculum because human culture assumed that warfare was a fundamental aspect of existence in a dangerous universe. She explained that humans considered military preparedness a moral obligation. Every generation had the responsibility to ensure that their descendants would possess the knowledge and capabilities necessary to survive whatever threats the future might bring. Zexhai returned to his seat, his movements heavy with the weight of understanding that had fundamentally altered his worldview. Our visit to the military academy concluded with Dr. Vasquez explaining humanity's long-term strategic goals. They intended to establish peaceful relationships with galactic civilizations if possible, but they were prepared for the possibility that such relationships might prove impossible. Humanity was developing technologies and strategies that would allow them to expand across the galaxy regardless of alien cooperation or resistance. They were planning for a future where they might need to fight every species in known space simultaneously, and they were confident in their ability to emerge victorious from such a conflict. But the most chilling aspect of their planning was its casual assumption of human superiority. Not technological superiority, but intellectual superiority. Jews, waste, health, trust, and challenge. Vasquez explained that humans believed their species possessed strategic thinking capabilities that no other known intelligence could match. She told our delegation that humanity had studied every available example of alien military thinking and found it lacking in creativity, adaptability, and psychological sophistication. Other species approached warfare as a technological problem to be solved through superior equipment. Humans approached warfare as an intellectual challenge that required understanding their opponent's psychology better than those opponents understood themselves. The journalist stared at her recording device, struggling to process the implications of what she was hearing. You're saying that humans consider themselves naturally superior warriors to any other species in the galaxy?
Not naturally superior, Zexhai corrected.
Evolutionarily superior. Dr. Vasquez explained that human military thinking had been refined through thousands of years of warfare against opponents who possessed equal intelligence and technological capability. They had been forced to develop strategic thinking that could succeed against enemies who could match their creativity and adaptability. Other galactic species had achieved dominance through technological advancement or numerical superiority. Humans had achieved dominance through intellectual evolution. They had turned warfare into a science more precise than physics and an art more sophisticated than any cultural expression. That was the lesson, Dr. Green. Vasquez wanted our delegation to understand. The humans who had defeated our fleets weren't exceptional individuals or specialized elite forces. They were ordinary representatives of a species that had evolved strategic thinking as a survival mechanism. Every human possessed capabilities that exceeded the military training of most galactic species. They didn't need to be soldiers to understand warfare because warfare was fundamental to their culture, their education, their entire approach to existence in a dangerous universe.
As Zexhai concluded his account of the military academy visit, the chamber fell into contemplative silence.
The journalist's antennae drooped as she began to grasp the true nature of the species that had so completely outmaneuvered the galaxy's most powerful military forces. The recording device continued its steady hum, capturing the moment when galactic understanding of humanity shifted from viewing them as a fortunate primitive species to recognizing them as something far more dangerous, a species that had weaponized intelligence itself. The return journey to Valorian space passed in contemplative silence among the delegation members. Each officer struggled privately with the implications of what they had witnessed on Earth, but none were prepared to articulate the fundamental shift in their understanding of galactic power dynamics. Zexhai spent the voyage compiling his tactical assessment, trying to translate human military capabilities into terms that Valorian leadership might comprehend. The report I submitted to Imperial Command contained 47 recommendations for immediate policy changes regarding humanity. Zexhai continued, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had tried desperately to prevent a catastrophe that others refused to acknowledge. Every recommendation was classified as paranoid speculation and filed away without serious consideration. The journalist noticed that Zexhai's breathing had become more labored, his claws drumming against the table in increasingly agitated patterns. The memories of those final months before humanity changed everything clearly triggered profound psychological distress. Emperor Vaxtal rejected my assessment that humans represented an existential threat to galactic civilization. He dismissed my warnings about their strategic thinking capabilities as the exaggerations of an officer whose pride had been wounded by defeat. The High Command believed that humanity's victory had been achieved through technological advantages that could be countered through conventional military development. Imperial intelligence launched a massive espionage operation designed to steal human technology and tactical information. Hundreds of covert operatives were deployed throughout human space, attempting to infiltrate their military installations, academic institutions, and research facilities. The operation represented the largest intelligence-gathering effort in Valorian history. Zexai's mandibles clicked in what might have been bitter amusement. Every single operative was captured within hours of entering human territory, not killed or imprisoned, but gently apprehended by human security forces, who seemed to know exactly when and where each infiltration attempt would occur. The humans returned our spies along with complete dossiers on their backgrounds, training, and mission objectives. They had identified every member of our intelligence operation before it began, tracked their movements through space, and monitored their communications throughout the infiltration attempts. But that wasn't the most disturbing aspect of their response. Along with our captured operatives, the humans sent detailed intelligence assessments of Valorian espionage capabilities. They had analyzed our techniques, identified our technological limitations, and developed countermeasures for methods we hadn't even deployed yet. The implications of humanity's intelligence superiority clearly still overwhelmed Zexai. His voice became strained as he continued. "Doctor!" Vasquez sent a personal message to Emperor Vaxtool, explaining that human security services had been aware of Valorian intelligence activities for years before our first contact. They had been monitoring our operations throughout the galaxy, studying our methods, and learning everything about our civilization through passive observation. She explained that humanity routinely conducted surveillance of all galactic species as part of their standard security protocols. They possessed detailed intelligence on every major civilization's military capabilities, political structures, economic systems, and technological development. The humans knew more about us than our own government agencies knew about ourselves. Vasquez's message also contained an offer that changed everything about galactic politics. She proposed the establishment of formal diplomatic relations between humanity and the major galactic powers, not as conquered subjects seeking peace, but as equals seeking mutually beneficial cooperation. The journalist leaned forward, sensing that this moment marked a fundamental shift in Zex's narrative. How did the Empire respond to this offer? With suspicion and arrogance, Zexai replied without hesitation. Emperor Vaxthul interpreted the diplomatic overture as evidence that humans feared the consequences of their aggression against galactic civilization. He believed that their offer of cooperation was motivated by recognition that they couldn't survive a coordinated response from multiple species. The Emperor convened the Galactic Security Council, demanding that all major civilizations unite against the human threat. He presented evidence of their military capabilities, their intelligence operations, their strategic planning for galactic expansion. He called for a coordinated military response that would eliminate humanity before they could establish a permanent foothold beyond their home system. The Council's response surprised everyone, including me. Rather than agreeing to military cooperation against humanity, every member species requested formal diplomatic contact with Earth. The Kellery, the Threnody, the Nexus Alliance, even the traditionally isolationist Zephyrian communes, all wanted to establish peaceful relationships with humanity. Zexai's breathing apparatus cycled heavily as he recalled the political upheaval that followed. Within 60 days of the Emperor's call for united resistance, 17 major galactic civilizations had signed non-aggression pacts with humanity. Trade agreements, cultural exchange programs, scientific cooperation treaties, the entire galactic political structure realigned itself around accommodation with human interests. Emperor Vaxthul found himself isolated diplomatically, his calls for military action against humanity rejected by every potential ally. The Valorian Empire, which had dominated galactic politics for 3 centuries, suddenly discovered that it was considered a destabilizing influence by its former client states. That was when Dr. Vasquez delivered her final message to Valorian leadership. Not a threat or ultimatum, but a simple statement of fact that ended the Empire's role as a galactic power. The chamber fell silent as Zexai gathered himself for what was clearly the most painful memory of his entire experience. She explained that humanity had been monitoring Valorian activities throughout the galaxy for months following our first contact. They had observed our attempts to build military alliances against them, our efforts to acquire technologies that could counter their advantages, our preparations for what the Emperor called the final campaign to restore galactic order. Dr. Vasquez informed the Emperor that humanity had concluded that peaceful coexistence with the Valorian Empire was impossible. Our leadership had demonstrated a commitment to aggression that made diplomatic solutions unworkable. Therefore, humanity would implement what she called alternative conflict resolution. The Empire's response was swift and predictable. Emperor Vaxthul ordered the immediate mobilization of every available military asset for a final strike against human space. Every ship, every weapon, every resource the Empire possessed was dedicated to what he declared would be humanity's complete destruction. Zexai's voice became barely audible as he continued. The final Valorian fleet was the largest military force in recorded galactic history. 2,000 capital ships, 8,000 escorts, 40,000 support vessels, nearly 500,000 trained military personnel equipped with the most advanced weapons our civilization had ever produced. We never reached human space. The simple statement carried more weight than any detailed description of military disaster. The journalist stared at Zexai, beginning to understand the scope of what had occurred. The entire fleet simply stopped. Every ship, every weapon, every system simultaneously ceased to function. Not destroyed, not damaged, but completely inert. Dead in space, drifting between star systems, unable to move or communicate or even maintain life support. Human ships appeared around us as if they had been waiting in ambush, but our sensors hadn't detected any enemy presence until they chose to reveal themselves. They began boarding our vessels immediately, not with weapons or force, but with engineering teams that began repairing our disabled systems. Dr. Vasquez herself came aboard the Emperor's flagship. She found Vaxthal on the bridge, paralyzed like the rest of us, conscious but unable to move or speak. She explained to him that humanity had decided to end the conflict permanently. Zexai's mandibles clicked rapidly as he recalled that moment of ultimate defeat. She told the Emperor that the Valorian Empire was being dissolved, not through conquest or occupation, but through what she called administrative reorganization. Human forces were simultaneously occupying every Valorian world, taking control of every government facility, assuming responsibility for every aspect of imperial administration. But they weren't acting as conquerors. Dr. Vasquez explained that humanity was implementing a transition to local civilian governance under temporary human oversight. Valorian worlds would be returned to their populations as independent systems once stable democratic institutions could be established. The Empire's military forces would be disbanded, its weapons destroyed, its leadership retired to civilian status. The political structure that had enabled Valorian aggression would be eliminated,